Hi guys, Olive here today to discuss Glimpses of the Moon by Edith Wharton and a modern audio reimagining of that same story. Glimpses of the Moon is one of the great writer Edith Wharton's lesser-known novels, although she was a very prolific writer and she lived until the age of 75, so I would actually classify most of her books as lesser-known, considering so few of them are actually famous. But this is the book that followed probably her most famous novel, The Age of Innocence, which was published in 1920. Glimpses of the Moon was released shortly thereafter in 1922. Especially compared to its moody predecessor, Glimpses of the Moon is a much lighter book, especially for Edith Wharton. I've seen it said that at the time she was writing this, she wanted a bit of escapism. She wanted to write about anything but the horrors of World War I. She didn't want to think about it. She wanted a mental reprieve. She wanted that escapism. So Glimpses of the Moon is how she gave that to herself and to her audience before then going on to confront those topics in her next book, A Sun at the Front. Glimpses of the Moon stars two high in society but low on funds characters, Susie Branch and Nick Lansing. They are both a part of the upper class world. They were probably born into it. So they have a taste for the finer things in life, but not the wallets for them. We don't get a whole lot of background information on either of them, interestingly enough, but we do know that Nick is an aspiring writer. Not that it's gotten him anywhere, financially or otherwise, and we know that Susie has survived over the past 20 years by living off the generosity of her wealthy friends. Another thing Susie and Nick have in common, though, and it's really the greatest capital that they have, social capital that is that they are both very well liked. They are popular, people enjoy their company, rich people want them around, and thus foot the bill for their upkeep. And that's really what affords both of them as individuals the luxury to keep existing in these circles without any money to their names. We do find out very quickly, however, that Susie and Nick move about these worlds very differently. They seem to have different sets of ethics about what it is they're doing. While Nick has a much breezier air about him, kind of floating in and out of social circles as he pleases, which you could definitely argue he's allowed to get away with because he is a man, there is something a whole lot scrappier about the way that Susie moves through the worlds. You can tell that she's been a part of this system of the upper class for so long that she deeply understands it. She understands the rules, and she operates very adroitly within that system. I wouldn't go so far as to call her a schemer, because I don't think the motive is to get as much out of people as she possibly can. She's just looking to get by. But you can see that she knows how to strategically employ people-pleasing, because you see it in action in the book itself. She'll be talking to one of her wealthy friends, and they'll talk about Susie for a little while, what she's got going on, but Susie is always very eager to flip the conversation back over to her wealthy friend. Kind of like, enough about me, let's talk about you. Because she knows, at the end of the day, what that rich person wants more than anything else is just the chance to go on at length about themselves in front of a captive audience. And Susie gives that to them, which is why they want her around. Nick even notes later on in the book just how intelligent Susie really is, but how big of a shame it is that she's had to dedicate so much brain space over the years to figuring out the nuances of this world. She's essentially spent the last 2 decades playing human chess, so she doesn't have the mental capacity to hand over to thinking about the finer things in life, like the arts, for instance. Nick and Susie finally meet because of an overlap in their social circles, and they hit it off immediately. They're both insiders in this world enough that they speak the same language, but then they're outsiders enough that they share the same disdain for the frivolity of it all. They just get each other effortlessly. Even so, Susie has to temporarily give up the friendship with Nick that she values so much because one of her bougie friends gets jealous of their friendship and tells Susie to back off of Nick. And she knows it's ridiculous. She doesn't want to do it, but she also knows that she relies upon this person. So chucking Nick to the side, putting him on ice, is something she knows she has to do. And I feel like it's just such a good early example of the kind of concessions that Susie has had to get used to. The two of them do find their way back to one another, after which Susie gets an idea. She predicts that if the two of them got married, it would all of a sudden make them a novelty in the eyes of their rich friends, because now they're not just Nick and Susie, but Nick and Susie, a newlywed couple. Their rich friends would want to host them as part of their honeymoon. They would be able to collect wedding gifts. And I'm not just talking off of a wedding registry. I'm talking big old checks and also the use of properties that their rich friends aren't currently occupying. It seems like the hope was that it could temporarily sustain them. Like for at least a calendar year, they would be able to rely on that money and the use of those properties until either one of them figured something else out, either a different way to make money or, even better, a different marriage prospect, a rich person to marry who could then take care of them. It seems like Susie only ever posed this situation to be a kind of stopgap solution. We learn at this time that marriage in general was being treated a lot more casually. So it seems like the intention always was, at least on paper, that the two of them would eventually seek a divorce, either after one of them found someone better or after a period of time had passed. The book opens up shortly after this fake marriage has taken place, but the way that they interact with one another, you would be fooled into thinking that this was a love match. They're just so calm and easy around one another. They seem so happy in each other's presence. The scenes that they're together are actually quite romantic, starting with the opening scene. Even as their deception is being revealed to you, it makes it really hard to buy that this is transactional. But then things start to happen, as they need to, or else it would be quite the boring book. Susie, with the natural affection she does feel toward Nick, and also that nasty little habit she has of people-pleasing, she does something small-ish to try to make Nick happy that you can tell he does not agree with ethically. So that's a little bit of a bump in the road, but it only hints at what's to come shortly thereafter, because there is a major breach of trust between the two of them. Susie gets cornered, essentially, into doing a quite immoral favor for a friend of hers that they are currently staying with, so she feels indebted to this person. Susie is not happy about doing it, but we do get the sense that it's just one of a long list of compromises that she's had to make over the years in order to get by, or manage, as she calls it. But we also can tell that Susie knows deep down that what she's doing is not okay. She feels an immense amount of shame about it, which is why she keeps it from Nick. She is sworn to secrecy by this friend, but it seems like even the friend didn't expect that she would actually keep the secret from her husband. And so this friend reveals the favor that Susie did to Nick himself, and he is mortified. Nick had put all the financial matters into Susie's hands, but once he realizes what the true cost of what they're receiving is, he can't tolerate it. And that leads to Nick and Susie spending a considerable amount of this novel apart, during which they both test out the rules of their arrangement. They both seriously consider moving on with different people, both of whom, by the way, are excellent matches for both of them. Both of their suitors seem to embody everything that they both say they want in a partner, even if in both of those situations something doesn't feel quite right, especially Susie. I didn't go into a book set in the 1920s expecting to see a textbook, and I mean textbook, example of someone catching the ick for someone else. But that's what happened. Glimpses of the Moon both does and doesn't feel like an Edith Wharton novel. It's typical of her style in that it's sniffing out the moral stench of high society, but it seems like most of the time in her novels, her characters are a part of that rotting system, and she treats them kind of like voodoo dolls in her novels, figuratively stabbing at them with pins as a kind of catharsis. But in Glimpses of the Moon, instead of making her characters either victims of that system or part of the problem, she instead has them have one foot outside of that system so that they're looking in at it along with us as the audience with scorn, even as they are actively under its thumb. And it seems like Wharton is challenging them both throughout this novel to find their way out of that system, to escape it like a corn maze. The moon is a very potent symbol in this novel. It's even in the title, which, by the way, is pulled directly from Hamlet. It's actually something that Hamlet says upon seeing his father's ghost for the first time. And I am sure that we all could have an hours-long discussion about that title, about Hamlet and its connection to this novel, and also the moon as a symbol, because the moon can represent so many things. It means so many different things to us as humans. But I don't think its placement in both the first and last sentences of this novel is a coincidence. Like, I don't think that's an accident. And what I took away from that is that the moon is a kind of mirror in this novel. At both ends of this novel, the characters are challenged to look into their own reflection and ask themselves if they like what they're seeing reflected back at them. Do they like how they're acting? Do they like how they're spending their time? Do they like who they're surrounding themselves with? I think this sham of a relationship really forces them to consider what it is they value and who they want to be. Our characters rise to that occasion in this book. I won't say how, so I don't spoil the surprise, but I will say that it was a very nice surprise that Edith Wharton gave us characters who are actually decent people and then also gave them nice things. Before they can have said nice things, of course, they do make a total hash of things. They become victims of their own choices. They become threatened by the very things they thought they wanted, and then have to have their ego shattered in order to discover what it is they truly want, while also breaking the hearts of two perfectly nice people outside of this situation. But hey, it's a small price to pay. If it wasn't clear by now, I adored this book. I think The House of Mirth will always be my number one favorite Edith Wharton novel, but this one came remarkably close. And speaking of The House of Mirth, Susie Branch as a character did remind me a little bit of some other Wharton heroines, like Lily Bart from The House of Mirth, if Lily wasn't so determined to get in her own way. But then there's also just the tiniest little bit of Undine Spragg from The Custom of the Country in Susie's social maneuvering, although Susie's not a sociopath, so she does have that going for her. Speaking of Undine, though, it was a really interesting callback to The Custom of the Country that the Hickses, who are a family you meet in Glimpses of the Moon, are from the exact same fictional Midwestern town that Undine comes from. So I guess they're all part of the same Edith Wharton cinematic universe. Glimpses of the Moon was a commercial success when it was released, and it also inspired a silent film adaptation that was released in 1923, although it sadly has been lost in the years since. But fun fact, one of F. Scott Fitzgerald's very first jobs in Hollywood was writing the dialogue cards for that silent film adaptation. And I've seen some speculation online that Glimpses of the Moon may have actually inspired at least parts of The Great Gatsby. And thinking about both of those books, I can kind of see it. I would want to reread them both with that in mind, but it is really fun to think about. But a more recent piece of media that the novel inspired is actually a short Audible original by the same name, and it essentially takes the central plot of the novel and plops it into the modern day. Our current era Nick and Susie meet in much the same way as the originals did, but they live in New York City. And Susie's idea for them to get married is not just for the big old honey fund, but also as a way to gain more social media followers. She's an aspiring influencer, and she very savvily figures out how to make Nick's fake proposal go viral, which earns her a whole bunch of fans, and brands start sponsoring her Instagram posts from that moment forward. It's a cute take on the story. Certainly publicity stunt relationships aren't anything new, so that element transferred very well into the modern day and age. But I couldn't help but feel that this version lacked the heart of the original. I mean, you can feel from the very first page of the novel that Nick and Susie love each other. They're the last to know it, of course, but they have the perfect blend of friendship and attraction that I have noticed in, no joke, every single relationship I've seen work out long term. But this Nick and Susie, while they like each other, they're friendly, I just didn't feel that spark. That and the fact that this Susie is actually very cutthroat. She actually reminds me quite a bit of Undine Spragg. And it was hard for me to emotionally invest in this version of Susie when I had so freshly fallen in love with Wharton's version. It was fun. I thought there was some social commentary thrown in there about our modern digital age that was kind of intriguing. And it was low investment in terms of the time commitment. I think it's only something like 2 hours long. But But then also it was free with my Audible membership, so it's not like I had to spend extra to listen to this. So that was also nice. I will say if you want to give this a listen, I would recommend reading the book first. And not because I'm some sort of stickler about always reading the book first. I don't always think that's the case. But there are other characters from Glimpses of the Moon referenced in this Audible short, like other than just Nick and Susie. And I feel like their appearances in this Audible short will mean more to you if you've met those characters already in the book. So overall, just a fun little listen, a nice chaser to a novel that I had fallen in love with. So those were at least some of my thoughts on Glimpses of the Moon. I'm sure if I sat here long enough, I could come up with more to say, because Edith Wharton just brings that out of me. There is so much depth, so much substance to her books, you could almost take a bite out of them. But for the sake of time, I will cut myself off here. I have, however, spoken about a number of other Edith Wharton books here on my channel over the years, so if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts, I will link those videos for you in the description box below. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you will also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internets. So Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I am reading and doing right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.